I'd like to introduce Dr. David Waugh, who is the director of Laurel Parque Fundación. David hails from England, but he has spent many years doing research on psittacines and other birds in Latin America and a number of other countries. As I said, he's director of the Laurel Parque Fundación, who has supported the blue-throated macaw program in Bolivia to the tune of $1 million or more over quite a few years. And he's going to talk to us today about the situation with the blue-throated macaw in Bolivia. David.
Put this here. Okay. Well, thank you, Janice. Good morning, everybody. Thanks very much for being here at this early hour, all fresh and moistured. As Janice said, I'm going to talk to you this morning about the blue-throated macaw, the challenges that we face in trying to conserve this critically endangered species, the risks that this species faces now and possibly into the future. Before I get on to the talk, I just want to thank again the AFA for inviting me to speak here at this convention, and of course to the Laurel Parque Foundation for being my sponsor to be here. Okay. Well, this is one of the species of parrots in the world where you can apply the label enigmatic. It was in captivity for a long time before anybody knew exactly where it came from in the wild. Laurel Parque, before the Laurel Parque Foundation was even created, Laurel Parque bred this species in 1984 and actually claims the first captive breeding of the species. But in 1992, Munn and Jordan discovered the species, scientifically discovered the species. I think the locals already knew it was there, but they scientifically described the location of the species in the department of Beni in the north of Bolivia, as you can see in the maps here. And almost immediately it was clear that this was a species with an extremely small and restricted population, and therefore it went straight onto the critically endangered list of the IUCN and BirdLife International. You can see the size of the Department of Beni, the red patch there on the slide. Now, this species lives in seasonally flooded grasslands. The flat plains or savannas of most of the Beni get covered with water during the rainy season, to the extent of that almost 58,000 square miles of territory. And on average, that terrain is about 500 feet above sea level. So that's not really particularly high. So this is just a very clear manifestation of what it's like down there during the wet season, principally December to April. And by contrast, there's a very strong dry season from June through to late September. And that's the season when the farmers, the ranch owners, burn the grasslands to promote the growth of young sprouts for the cattle. And indeed, most of this area is given over, the vast majority of the area is given over to private cattle ranching. Importantly, it's not all flat grasslands. There are elevated areas which don't get covered during the rainy season, which therefore allows forest to grow on those elevated pieces of land, or patches of land, I should say. And those are what we call forest islands, and they constitute about 4% of the total of those otherwise grasslands. And most of the islands are dominated by motaku palms. In fact, on average, 69% of the trees on the islands are these palms, and these palms are very important to the blue-throated macaw, especially for food, but also for nesting sites, although probably historically when there were many more larger trees of different species in the habitat, which have since gone, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Probably the blue-throated macaw preferred those other species of trees, but by default, now you will find it nesting in motaku palms, especially. And this is an aerial view, and you can see some lines, some terraces there, and this is evidence, archaeological evidence of the previous indigenous occupation of those lands. In fact, the population was about 10 times what it is now. 300 years ago, there were people, indigenous people, living there and creating their agricultural systems like you see, and it's thought that principally they grew maize or corn. But now it's given over to, with the arrival of Europeans, it's now given over, as I've said before, to cattle raising. The stock density is calculated at about 12 acres per head. The carrying capacity, as you can see there, varies. So it's difficult to say whether overall there is overstocking or not. But what is clear is that there is severe cattle damage within the forest islands, which in fact form a critical resource for the blue-throated macaw, so that there's overgrazing and trampling of the saplings, so that there's no new growth coming through. So there is a process of senescence of the palms and other trees on those islands. And then also with the burning in the dry season, burning can get out of control, of course, and so you get a lot of accidental burning within those islands, which is ridiculous, really, because the ranch owners are relying on these islands to provide shelter for their cattle at certain times of the day and certain times of the year. But anyway, the macaws use these islands, as I said. They feed on the fruits, and they will nest in the palms also. During the 1970s and 1980s, there was effectively uncontrolled capture and exportation of this species. We do not know what the original population size of the blue-throated macaw was before this intensive exploitation phase took place. We don't really know how many birds came out of Bolivia during that phase, but one estimate puts it at 1,200. I think that's likely to be an underestimate, but really we're not clear on this. So after the discovery in 1992, Armonia, the Asociación Armonia, excuse me, which is a Bolivian NGO, started to look at what it could do for the blue-throated macaw, and in 1995 we made an alliance between Armonia and Laurel Park Foundation to set up the blue-throated macaw conservation program. And as Janice said, to date, the Laurel Park Foundation has put in over $1.2 million. But of course, it's a collective effort. I mean, that amount of money has been collected also from other sources, and many, many contributors. Quite a few people in this audience, I know, have contributed and helped us in this, for which I thank you very much. And we continue forward in the hope that, again, it can be a collective effort. Okay, well, I'm going to name certain places as we go through, and I might as well name the principal ones now and show you where they are. So this is the Beni department. The capital of Beni is Trinidad, and that's an important area for blue-throated macaws, particularly in the south of it, and there you'll find them in the north. Santa Ana over here, and Santa Rosa further west. Those are places that are mentioned. So when this all started, we had records of blue-throated macaws in two places principally, a subpopulation south of Trinidad and a scattering north of Trinidad and east of the river Mamoré. This is the main big river going through. The name is over here. I don't know how it got displaced over there, but it refers to this river going through here. That's an important landmark. So the project started off looking for nests, checking the number of eggs in the nests, the survival of those eggs, the hatchability, looking at the number of chicks that were fledging from natural nests. And as you can see, we were using ladders, but we were also using interesting improvisations to see what was in nests. And then going to the different ranches and speaking with the ranch owners particularly, but also the communities of people who live and work on those ranches, and to the local schools, also small schools, but schools where the kids from the people who are working on the ranches go to learn. Well, this carried on for quite a while, and then in 2003 we decided that we had to take a stock of what we had done to that date and make a proper plan to lead us into the future if we were going to have a chance to bring this species back from the brink. So we wrote the species recovery plan, and that's a very broad document which lays out the most important threats and the most important responses that are required to meet those threats. So this is a list of the main threats or difficulties or problems or risks, whatever word you want to use, that you will find in that species recovery plan. Certainly, there was a lack of important biological information. We've now got more information. There was insufficient understanding of the status of this species to trigger more action on behalf of the authorities. And the authorities in this equation are important. Illegal trafficking, the possibility that trafficking could continue to take place, habitat deterioration and loss, which was certainly taking place and still takes place, human disturbance of sensitive sites, particularly where some well-meaning landowners want to between inverted commas, want to protect a nest, but keep going there and disturb birds too much. A possible extinction risk from parasites, diseases and predators on a very small population such as this one. Lack of suitable nesting sites and competition for those suitable nesting cavities. And then a possible low genetic variability which could limit natural recovery. Here's the team, biologists and educators, all working in the Department of Beni, for the conservation of this species. Okay, so we did a systematic field survey. Back in 2001, at one point we could only count 36 birds, and we estimated that the population could be down to as few as 50 birds. So that, of course, is a critical situation. It's not easy to get around in the Beni, neither in the dry season, but even worse in the wet season. So we do have a project vehicle, as you can see. Whoops, as you can't see. Oh. Back. I'm pressing back. You can do it, can't you? Yeah. Thank you. So we've got the project vehicle here, which gets us to certain places quite effectively in the dry season and is very good for transporting nest boxes and other heavy equipment. But for these surveys, we have to use either dirt bikes or, more usually, horses. And since this species is very, very sparsely distributed in this terrain, it's not an easy thing to survey blue-throated macaws. And don't let any other person tell you it's easy, because it's not. So in 2004, we found a westward extension of the blue-throated macaw. We found blue-throated macaws over here in the near to the Santa Rosa community. And by 2005, we had effectively doubled the known sites with the presence of blue-throated macaws. And normally we were seeing them in groups of threes, possibly fours, or in pairs. notably in pairs. And that was the typical pattern until 2007, when we found a single site with more than 70 macaws. And that's this site here, the nearest community being Santa Ana. So this was really a big break with what had been happening before. So here you see something that had never been seen before, which in this case there are 17 if you want to count them. So we were seeing large flocks at this place, and they were going to a communal roost where, in fact, the 70 birds had been counted at this communal roost. And this was, as I said, an important milestone in the project and in particular in the survey. So between 2004 and 2008, 203 sites were surveyed, 53 sites had presence of blue-throated macaws, and 277 macaws were counted. In 2011, at that site where the 70 were found in 2007, there were 104 counted, and this was done by a group of researchers, and they were stationed at different points around this particular site, and this is a very accurate count. And so the population we estimate to be between 250 and 350. You might have seen other figures being published fairly recently, and those figures have been said to be based on the number of known individuals. But there are very few species in the world where you count all of the known individuals and say that's what the population is. In all cases, in this kind of work, you have to make estimates, hopefully intelligent estimates based on good data. And in our case, we believe that that estimate that you see there is a reasonably robust estimate. We set up a center in the city of Trinidad. This is for promoting awareness and particularly for bringing in school groups. The farmers, the ranch owners come in, and therefore the staff at that center, they can talk to them about how they can perhaps manage their land in a more macaw-friendly way, particularly in relation to those forested islands, and maybe trying to do some stock rotation around the islands and fencing off areas to keep the cattle out during certain periods of time to allow the growth of the young plants to the point where they're not afterwards damaged by the cattle. Schools coming in, and also we use this as a base for broader scale awareness, in particular through TV and radio interviews. And this is a local one just for the Beni area, or even maybe just Trinidad and its immediate surroundings. But also we have here this is the principal field coordinator. He's talking to media which have come from various parts of Bolivia. So this is at national level, and it's important to keep putting out the message at those different levels to keep the program in the public eye, and also again to try to engage the authorities better with what's going on. This is the project vehicle, so we have also outreach using the project vehicle, going out from the center in Trinidad out into various parts of the Department of Beni. And when this vehicle arrives, of course, it causes quite a splash because it's got all of this blue on it, and it's got the macaw, and so it's quite a deal for that vehicle to roll up at a ranch somewhere. And so we continue this work that we started off at the beginning, talking to the local people in the communities, and giving them goodies like the nice stuffed blue-throated macaw toy here, and also taking those radio interviews out into those ranches, into those communities, again to give the flavor that this species is a native of the Beni, and these people are native of the Beni, and the two go together. And here you have a group of people who've received their T-shirts and soft toys and whatever. But this helps to keep in the mind of people that this is their special bird and they can help to protect it. And going to the schools, as I mentioned, we still do that. And it's critical that the younger generation understand that this bird is their bird and it's very special and they should help to protect it. Some nice paintings. Okay, another issue is related to these so-called macheteros. That means that they each carry a machete. But this is an indigenous custom, a traditional custom of the region, where they have these costumes and have the headdresses and they do dances. But each headdress, of course, is made up of macaw feathers, and each headdress can involve the tail feathers from 16 macaws upwards. And, of course, those macaws are hunted. They're not all blue-throated macaws, of course. In fact, we have found only a couple of blue-throated macaw feathers in headdresses from the survey that we did at the beginning, but it could present a risk. And anyway, we don't want people to be hunting macaws, whatever the species. So we want to tackle this. And we have done very effectively. In fact, we set up with the local authorities and with the local indigenous council, the first, way back in time now, the first competition to make headdresses out of artificial feathers, or feathers made of artificial materials, and that's the poster that announces that. And this has become an annual event and has become extremely popular. So you've got these different efforts here, group efforts like you see here, and prizes are given. And these are quite substantial prizes for people at their income level in Bolivia to receive. And this has evolved so that now we have training workshops with indigenous people who are experienced in making headdresses, training other people, their own people, how to make these headdresses with these artificial feathers. And here we have a dance going on with headdresses made of artificial feathers. And it's quite a spectacular thing. And then we have the judging, and we give the prizes according to the best designs. And this has become, well, I wouldn't say commercialized as such, but what has happened is that one of these leading designs has been packaged into a kit. And so this box contains the kit, the headdress kit, and that can be assembled with a small set of instructions to produce this wonderful headdress. And this is very successful, promoting even more interest in the possibility to make these kinds of headdresses. And although it may not make so much difference to the blue-throated macaw, one hopes it makes a big difference to macaws overall, and it has a very strong message, a very strong awareness component. Okay, coming back to the more biological aspects of this species, we have been continuing our monitoring and protection of natural and artificial nest sites, and you'll notice that there is a considerable difference in the configuration of this entrance to this entrance that you see here, and that's something that we're having to deal with in our artificial nests. Here you have some chicks or a young chick in this particular case, taken out of the nest for checking its measurements and health condition. And we've set up a nest box program with nest boxes of different designs. Largely, in fact, overall they're vertical boxes, but they have slight differences, particularly in the entrance configuration. And they are successful, and we have blue-throated macaws nesting in them, as you can see here. And I mentioned this difference in nest entrance configuration because we want to try to make this blue-throated macaw diameter and not the diameter of anything bigger. But the blue-throated macaws, of course, they don't want that. So they chew it. And they chew it even more, and it becomes like that. And so we've been putting in boxes which have it like that. But having it like that does mean that other species can go in. And these are a couple of species that will go in and do go in. And although the chestnut-fronted macaw is not a serious nest competitor, the blue and yellow macaw is. And it's a bigger, more robust species that can normally push out a pair of blue-throated macaws. Unfortunately, but this is something that we're not really able to get around. We've put metal plates around some nest holes to prevent the chewing, but then the blue-throated macaws don't like that either. This, of course, is not a collective effort of blue-throated macaws, but it's just to show you that that other things go in, and this, in fact, is the clutch of a black-bellied whistling duck, and also bees. There was a talk yesterday by Carol Efstathion about bees in nest boxes, and that happens with the blue-throated macaw boxes as well. But anyway, we continue, and we think we're getting more and more success as time goes on. We've had 39 chicks produced in the 6 most recent years. We've had 10 this year produced, and I must mention a very important collaborator in all of this, which is the Bern Endowment with their Adopt a Nest program, Adopt a Nido program, and that's been very important in this particular facet of the program. And then we get on to land management and protection. It's very difficult to persuade landowners to make changes in their current practices because they're like farmers everywhere in the world. They're really quite conservative about what they want to do with their land. And it's very difficult to demonstrate to them what the future economic benefits might be to them in, let's say, doing this stock rotation around the forest islands, for example. So this leads us on to something else, which is coming back to this site where the 70 birds were found, and now up to over 100, and the fact that that has now become what we call the Barba Azul Nature Reserve. Barba Azul means blue beard. That refers to the blue beard of the blue-throated macaw. So it started off originally as just over 10,500 acres. It very quickly expanded to over 12,000 acres. And that's been possible with the support of the American Bird Conservancy and the World Land Trust, US. And as I said before, the very accurate counts started in 2011, and we had this one of 104, and in 2012 there was still about 100 individuals counted, and this could be up to 30% of the global population of the species at this particular site. But we do have pairs staying in the reserve through the year, although we haven't actually found pairs nesting there, but in the ranch immediately to the east, which has more forested islands, there they are breeding. So there have been some comments that this is only in an area where there are birds spending the winter, that is the dry season, but that's actually not the case. And I think that because we're putting nest boxes up in those forest islands on the reserve, this will change and we will have breeding starting in the reserve. It needs to be managed, so we've got a fire break system in place, and a perimeter fence has been put all the way around, of course, and we've got a research program, a serious research program, not just for the blue-throated macaw, but for other things, because this reserve is important for other things, and I think that everything together it becomes more important. That is the sum of the parts is bigger than the how do you say that? The sum of the parts is bigger than the whole, or something like that. Anyway, what we've also done is we've financed the construction of a. Oops, excuse me. Now, how do I do this? I think it's easier if you do it, Andy. Thank you. I'll go back. Yeah, I'll go back. You
got the two buttons on the bottom, one's forward and one's back. You hit the other one.
I need to go back. And one more, please. Thanks. One more. Researchers can come to a place, but this is really quite a remote place. So do they stay in tents or what do they do? So we built this research station that you see here, which is quite comfortable for the researchers to stay and forms a base for fairly long-term research. And we're hoping in the future to do something much more fancy for visitors who effectively will be tourists, eco-tourists, to see the wealth of wildlife that's on the reserve, including the blue-throated macaws, of course. So here's some of that wildlife that you can see, and in particular, let me mention these wading birds down here. It's clear that this area is extremely important for North American wading birds to spend the winter, and that's attracted the attention of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife under the, what's it called, the Near Tropical Migratory Bird Conservation Act, and so there's some support coming from that quarter as well for the wading birds that winter on that land. As I said, there's ecotourism potential. That's not very well developed at the moment, but I think if we think about sustainability of this whole program into the future, then it should become important. I mentioned this piece of land out to the east, the ranch out to the east, and that's this piece of land here. And now we actually are in the process of expansion of the reserve to become an area of over 27,000 acres, which is good news. And we're going through a legal process to make sure that that is documented with the authorities as a private reserve, what's called a private reserve of natural patrimony, so that the government can't come along and grab it and say, okay, this is not economically productive, it has to be used for cattle ranching or something like that. There's also the possibility of another patch of land further down here. The owner perhaps is interested to sell, so we hope that we can expand it even further. There's also this issue of possible continued illegal trafficking. In fact, there have been a couple of cases where we know that birds have been taken from nests. So that still goes on, but obviously nothing like what went on in the 1970s and 1980s. What we've done is we put in a hidden operative, if you like, a local person who was willing, who worked in the market of Santa Cruz, the big city in the south, to monitor the traffic that was going on with parrots in that market and in another big market in Cochabamba, another city. And in fact, it is really very sad, of course, what goes on. As you can see, in 2010 alone, there were more than 32,000 parrots in those two markets, moving through those two markets of 27 species. 94% of those parrots were estimated to be wild caught, and it included red-fronted macaws. Only on one occasion in 6 or 7 years did the blue-throated macaw turn up, two turned up. So we don't think that there is much pressure on the blue-throated macaw, but in that sense, but we have to remain vigilant to make sure that it doesn't start up again. And so we have also these big billboards that we've put at key points in the transportation network within the Beni, warning people about illegal trafficking, especially of blue-throated macaws. And we work with the local enforcement agencies to try and reinforce the message as much as possible, especially with the ranch owners, so that they know that they've got to keep a lookout as well. So for this work, Armonía did get a nice recognition. It was from the Committee for Sustainable Development of the Camera of Deputies of the Bolivian government at national level for their work for the blue-throated macaw, which is very nice to see. But even nicer is to see what I call the spontaneous signs that people are becoming more and more aware of the species and its significance to them as people from the Beni. These are things that happen without any stimulation from Arnemonia, without any stimulation from the Laura Foundation. It's just people doing their own thing and using the blue-throated macaw as part of their own thing. So here we have blue-throated macaws outside this cafeteria. We have this man here. He got a T-shirt from somewhere with the blue-throated macaws on it. Somebody stuck one on here. Why, I don't know, but they stuck it there. This little hotel has blue-throated macaws. Turning up in all sorts of places. The last World Cup, the Football World Cup, had a blue-throated macaw on it. This radio station put a blue-throated macaw. This was about the referendum for autonomy in the Department of Beni, and they decided that the blue-throated macaw was the thing to put on their banner. And that's really good. In the private sector, also on the backs of buses, on aircraft hangars, the previous Miss Beni decided her costume would be a blue-throated macaw costume. Fantastic. The costume I'm talking about. And also, you know, in other fashion shows, we have this spontaneous appearance of the blue-throated macaw. This is a very good sign that people are beginning to appreciate much more what they have. Very quickly, to finish off, captive management and breeding. Well, since that first breeding in 1984 between Laura Park and Laura Park Foundation, we've now fledged over 300 blue-throated macaws. We coordinate the International Stub Book and the European Endangered Species Program for the species. We know there are more than 1,000 specimens in captivity between Europe and North America at least. And we need to think about the possibilities that Bolivia might have to have a backup population within the country. And so we've started to work with the Santa Cruz Zoo, and in particular, we started off by, because the Santa Cruz Zoo is the only zoo in Bolivia that actually has blue-throated macaws, and it has breeding blue-throated macaws. And so we helped them put up these big billboards in the zoo to inform the visitors, and that zoo gets a big visitation because Santa Cruz has a population of about 4 million people. So there's a lot of people who go there because it's a place where they don't have to spend so much money to get in because it's a municipal zoo. So the future, what can we do? We need to work on this forest island restoration in the reserve to show how it's possible to do and to show that example to the landowners. We need to experiment much more with the artificial nest boxes. Of course, we need to keep working on the community, to keep pushing for those spontaneous recognitions of the blue-throated macaw to come through, to maintain our vigilance about the trafficking, to do periodic follow-up surveys, and to sustain this viable captive, what I call safety net population for the species. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Any questions? Could you go back to the slide right before this one?
Andy can. This one?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Don't take it away yet.
How big and how many of those, roughly, are the forest islands in that area?
In the reserve area?
Yeah.
Well, I think we have something like 22 on the reserve. And in the land that we're in the process of buying to the east, that's got something like 35. So
Are they a lot of acreage, or are they small? What's the size?
no, on average, I would say they're about 8-10 acres.
Okay.
Yeah. None of these forest islands are extensive. It's a strange geological feature that's formed over, of course, many thousands of years, I guess. There was one over here first. So,
Yeah, you mentioned 1,000 approximately birds in aviculture, I suppose. Do you think that's an underestimation?
yes. Yeah.
I would think so, because I've seen 15 myself.
Yes. There is a stud book keeper for the North America region called Jennifer Anderson. And I'm quite sure she'd be, if anybody wanted to contact her to get more accurate numbers as far as she knows, because she's trying desperately to find, exactly where the birds are. And she's got a pretty long list, but I'm sure that it's longer, and I'm sure there are more. So there was one person here. Yes.
You've got the reserve setting up. Are you still monitoring the birds that are out of the reserve?
Yes. Yeah, that's part of this periodic follow-up surveys. That the reserve is important, but it's not the be-all and end-all. We have to go and look at what's happening in those other sites, and to check on whether sites which had them present in the past big survey still have them there. So here.
Does more than one pair nest on one of these little islands?
Good question. I don't think we've ever had a case that they may be territorial, but they're so thinly spread that I think that the chances that it would happen are also quite thin.
Another comment, your figure of 1,000 in captivity, I don't know if y'all are trying to research that, but in the U.S., the blue-throated macaw is readily available.
Yeah.
If you're willing to pay the price. I'm known one pet store that had like 4 babies at one time.
Yeah, I think that the general consensus is that it's an underestimate.
Yeah, they're doing well here. I have 2 myself that are just pet.
Now, you mentioned in the islands that there were other trees there in the past that aren't there any longer.
Yeah, the question was about the trees that were in the islands in the past and are there no longer. It's not that they've become extinct or they've disappeared completely. It's just that they were selectively removed, and we're principally talking about hardwood species that are quite slow growing, and because of this invasion of cattle and the damage that it causes, there hasn't been the saplings haven't survived for regrowth. So there needs to be serious attention to ways to protect those saplings until they're robust enough to come through. So that's a very long-term scenario, of course. And in the meantime, we have to manage in ways to provide other cavities. So I don't know who was next. Yes, sir.
Is there any commingling, harmonious commingling of the blue-throated and the blue and gold macaw? And do they both have similar food intake, or?
Yeah, there is commingling, but not during the breeding season when this possible competition occurs between the blue and golds and the blue throats. The differences between the exact differences between the diets haven't really been looked at in any detail because there's never been time properly to look at it, but. They seem to eat pretty much the same variety of fruits, although the blue and golds probably, and I think work in Peru by Don Brightsmith has shown this, that they are much more likely to crack open the hard palm nuts and get the kernels out. So, Tony.
Yeah, you showed duck in the nest box, in the buds and in the house of the nest boxes. There are also raptors or hawks. Do you find that raptors use...
The only one is the barn owl.
Oh, is there only one raptor there?
No, there are loads of raptors in the area, but we've never had a diurnal raptor species nesting in the boxes. We've only had barn owls nesting in the boxes, and striated flycatchers, and also southern possums go in there to spend the night. And so there's and we actually put flashing on the trunks of those trees where we've got the active nests to try to prevent the mammalian potential predators getting in. Last one.
I would like to know where the artificial feather are made, where can they be found? I would love to collect feathers and send them out west, but maybe we can help out if we can introduce the artificial feathers again.
Okay. Well, at the moment they're only available in Bolivia, but if we can make a market in the USA, then fantastic. So we should talk about that.
I have one question that I want to ask. Would you comment on the value of captive breeding of blue throats in Bolivia and their release to augment the population?
Okay.
Take care.
All right. In the species recovery plan, there are all sorts of different actions which can be contemplated for bringing about the recovery of the species, and one of them potentially is reintroduction of birds to the wild from a captive source. We don't think that it's necessary at this stage, because we clearly see increasing numbers of bigger groups of macaws. Although I mentioned that the biggest ones we've seen have been at that one site where the reserve is now, we're beginning to see bigger groups forming south of Trinidad especially. And we think that there's a recovery taking place naturally in the sense that it's responding to the conservation actions that are taking place right now. There are quite big risks in introducing birds from captivity. It's got to be done extremely carefully, particularly from the disease point of view. It's also relatively expensive as a technique in comparison to other techniques. And it needs to be done for the right reasons. It mustn't be done to make a big splash to persuade people to give money, for example. It mustn't be done simply because there are lots of birds in captivity and therefore it makes more sense to put them into the wild. That's not how things work. You need to have the right conditions in the wild before you can contemplate putting birds from captivity, irrespective of how many birds there might be in captivity. So the thing needs to be turned on its head. And so we don't think that that's necessary at the moment. We do know, of course, that it's taking place. There's a group that's doing it. We just hope that they're careful and don't introduce something that we really didn't want introduced.